Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Elected to the state senate in 2002, Liz Krueger represents District 28, an area that encompasses the Upper East Side of Manhattan and a good part of East Midtown. She's the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, but she's also a leading advocate for the social issues of our time. And as I've said before, a most outstanding senator. She's also my friend and my guest today. So welcome.
Thank you.
I'm always delighted to have you. You are I won't go into the superlatives anymore. So you're in Albany.
I'm still saying after 13 years.
13 years
13
in Albany.
years in Albany.
What happens in Albany?
You know, lots of good things do happen. It doesn't get that much attention because it seems to be overwhelmed by the constant flow of disturbing things that happen in Albany. I don't know whether we're so much worse than other state capitals or there's more scrutiny of us right now. You know, some people believe that the federal prosecutors are too aggressive. I personally don't think so. I think that they actually move too slowly, and that if we could clear out some of the really bad people in Albany, and it's not that many of them, we could move forward to where the great state of New York ought to be. An independent thinking, progressive state capital where ideas become laws that can be representative and pilots for the rest of the country. That was our history, and I believe we can get back there.
Do you think the people who run for public office are they genuinely interested in public service? It goes, I guess, whenever we talk about it now, it's going to be there are and there aren't, right?
There are and there aren't.
Scale.
Unlike New York City, Albany's campaign finance system is the wild, wild west. Yeah. So it is very much who can raise the most money, you can win your seat. Unlike New York City, where there's a small donor matching system, there are mandates on honesty in elections, requirements for debate so the public has an opportunity to find out who you really are, or a better attempt to find out, more of an even playing field for people who can't raise a lot of money. We've tried to move that through the legislature in Albany unsuccessfully multiple times.
You were the Senate campaign chair for a while.
For a while, the Democratic
Senate. So are the Senate districts different? How many districts are marginal districts that could go Republican or Senate or Democrat? Well,
the Republicans have controlled the state Senate for almost all of the last 80 years. We had the majority for 2 years in my term there, and then we lost it. And we had a horrendous scene during it with a coup, a counter-coup, post-traumatic stress syndrome spreading. But the conservative Republicans have held the Senate mostly because of gerrymandered districts. Oddly, in the New York State Constitution, the Senate has the power to increase the number of senators. The Assembly doesn't. So every time Democrats seem to be getting close to taking the majority, the Senate Republicans add seats. In upstate New York, they make their seats smaller numbers of people, and then they squeeze some more Republicans in.
So they can enlarge the number.
Yes,
in the last districts?
In the last two redistrictings, they've added a seat each time.
So how many members of the state Senate are there?
There are now 63 members of the state Senate. And what they do is they make the downstate districts 10% population larger than the upstate. So New York City residents actually, it's not one person, one vote. Your vote is for a lesser than if you lived upstate.
So why doesn't somebody challenge that?
We, the Senate Democrats, tried to challenge it in court in both of the last two redistrictings. We begged Governor Cuomo not to go along with this deal. He promised he wouldn't go along with the deal. And then he did. He went along with the deal, and he urged everyone to pass the bill. And then he put in a constitutional amendment, basically putting it in statute forever, an unfair system of how we determine districts and no ability of the public to override it, because it's now in the Constitution. So we've done some real damage to equal...
The whole system is designed in a way to breed the corruption. By the campaign finance, by the lobbying laws that aren't there, basically, right? By the reapportionment, the districting.
Right.
So, that's a very difficult thing to overcome.
Well, it helps explain why I have been so frustrated and apparently so much of a failure in my goals for 13 years. We've made some baby steps forward, but we haven't been able to change the fundamental outline of the problems as you've described them.
Well, I have a plan, partly. I told you that before, that I want you to run for governor. So, I mean, we need somebody who's going to really try to do this and do it. But more than that, this is a state that does not allow citizens to the ability to put something on the ballot.
We're not an INR state, an initiative and referendum state. Now, people who have studied INR will tell you there's dangers and risks with that. California education funding, et cetera. But we've also seen in states with INR, we've seen them pass same-sex marriage earlier than states that went down that road legislatively. We've seen them legalize marijuana, unlike most states that do it legislatively. So we've seen real progressive positions taken through INR. There's concerns that INR can also translate to whoever has the most money and runs the best advertising campaigns can win that referendum.
That's any election these days.
That's right, it is any election these days. So I'm torn, actually. When INR came to the floor of the Senate, I shocked my colleagues because it's usually considered that Democrats don't support INR. And I said, I've watched how we make decisions. I think I trust the public more. I would go for INR.
For you. I mean, if we had a ballot initiative now about campaign finance, about lobbying, it would pass.
I think that's right.
It's just waiting for us to do that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, the catch is the way New York State does everything. The only way you can get a vote on the ballot is to move a constitutional amendment. And that requires 2 houses pass the same bill in 2 sessions. Well, if you could get us all to agree to that, we wouldn't necessarily need constitutional amendment.
Exactly.
So it's sort of a double setup to try to get constitutional amendments on a ballot.
Now, you could do it if you had a constitutional convention?
Yes, if you have a constitutional convention, you're opening up your constitution
to all
kinds of things.
Which is another thing that we've always been warned against, right?
Right. People are concerned that if we have a very strong constitution when it comes to any number of things, civil rights protections, workers and pension protections, protections of our park system. Mm-hmm. So there are many people who would tell you they're afraid to open up the Constitution. And I understand that because the devil's in the details and who got elected to decide the new Constitution. On the other hand, I do think you could have a constitutional convention around a specific group of topics. You wouldn't necessarily have to open up a constitutional convention to every single item within the Constitution. And you could ask the voters, do you want a constitutional convention for the following topics?
But that has to still come from Albany?
Well,
the question of whether you want
every 20 years, you're supposed to be allowed to ask the public, do you want a constitutional convention or not? I'm not 100% sure whether you can ask the question, should it be around a specific set of issues as opposed to just opening it up completely. But clearly the model of government we have is really not working effectively for the 21st century. And so the question of whether the public says it's worth the risk to open it up and evaluate everything is not an unreasonable question at all.
And where are the 20 years? When does it come up, do you know? I don't.
I want to say 7 in the number 7 year. So in 17, I think.
So that's soon.
That is soon.
So we could run a statewide campaign for constitutional delegates.
And that would be the ultimate assignment. That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. Yeah.
So the ethics, there were supposedly some new ethics rules?
Nothing to write home about would be how I would describe it. I think that the ethics changes that went through in the state budget were incredibly minimal, actually 2 years in a row now, did not do what people were asking of us and will have truly very minimal impact. And yet everyone up there seems to be saying, oh, we're done with ethics legislation. It's done. It's
even
not
faced
done.
with indictments.
Yes. Even those who may be faced with indictments now are still saying we're done with ethics legislation.
And then you've recently become very outspoken about the governor's new ruling about 90 days you can erase your email. I mean, is there no sensitivity as to what's happening in the outside world?
Well, on Friday, the governor announced he was dropping his 90-day auto delete, which is great.
He's a smart guy. How did he let that happen to begin with?
Great question. I don't know. Because it seemed to me to be a no-brainer.
Yeah, it was
that
just
you
silly.
shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
So his people did announce on Friday afternoon that they were going to end the auto delete policy. But they haven't put in writing, so I'm holding off on my opinion about what they're going to do instead. It sounded like they were telling workers, you make your own determination. If you think this email could be relevant for something, don't delete it. And that's a ridiculous assignment to put on every state worker. How do you know if this email might be relevant for some class action lawsuit a year and a half down the road? How do you know if this email could be relevant to the state's history and archive law?
Or to somebody's indictment.
Or to someone's indictment, exactly.
Yeah.
So I do think I put in a piece of legislation with Assemblymember Danny O'Donnell from, I think, your neck of the woods, the Upper West Side, and we looked very carefully at what the federal government is implementing under their email policies. We looked at the New York State open meeting law. We looked at the New York State archive law, and it's pretty clear that there's a whole series of types of records that are already in law supposed to be held, and simply updating them to include emails seems to us to be obvious and simple.
Definitely. All right, that's a good one. You were talking earlier today about editorials or stories in the press this weekend about passing legislation. Lobbyists. Are lobbyists among the most important people in Albany?
Well, it depends on
Which
who
lobby?
they are and what the topic is. Look, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any lobbyists. Sometimes lobbyists can be incredibly knowledgeable
And very important.
and very valuable to give you information about things. But clearly they are hired guns for a specific agenda. That's why they are lobbyists, right? Somebody pays them to accomplish something or to stop something. Lobbyists who are being funded by entities who then pour an enormous amount of money into the campaign coffers
That's the problem.
of candidates and parties is really the problem, because when you've received hundreds of thousands of dollars from a specific entity or a specific issue group, then their lobbyists show up and say, here's the piece of legislation we would like you to pass. Here's the piece of legislation you shall never allow to pass.
Yeah.
Well, they're not the 19.5 million New Yorkers that in theory you're elected to represent. They might only be 5 New Yorkers with a lot of money and a very big set of priorities of what they want to make sure happen for them or never happen. So real estate is sort of front and center as the example for any number of reasons. One, there's been enormous scandals around real estate entities who purchase special 421A deals for billionaire buildings. So 421A is supposed to be a tax credit abatement for building affordable housing, and yet some of the most expensive real estate in the world, in the middle of Manhattan, designed for billionaires, got 421A tax exemptions of mind-boggling numbers. Then
it shows that the owner pays, especially if they're in condominiums, the owner is paying less taxes on that multi-million dollar property.
Maybe paying 5% of what they would otherwise pay. And then the same people who were involved with those scandals were also the people who, it turns out, paid enormous amounts of money in campaign contributions through what's called the LLC loophole, where if you own real estate, every building you own is its own limited liability corporation, and there's logical reasons for doing it that way. But then under New York State's interpretation of law, every LLC is an individual person for campaign giving. So if a person can give $60,000 to the governor, each LLC, and there might be 50 owned by one person, can each give $60,000. There's a lot of money there. So the LLCs from real estate have poured millions of dollars into campaign committees of Senate Republicans from outside New York City The only reason they're investing in them is to make sure they pass housing laws that those real estate entities want passed. So they know they can't get people who are elected by the citizens of New York City to vote for those bills. So they pour huge amounts of money into legislators from outside New York City who actually control the majority votes in the Senate and then determine the outcome of New York City housing policy, which there's almost no issue probably as important as affordable housing for the future of the city. Okay, public education, yes. Mass transit, yes.
Yeah.
But I'd say public education, mass transit, affordable housing are the three biggies for New York City. And when you've got one subset within an industry dictating what housing policy is going to be, not because it's what the mayor or the council of New York City believe is in the best interests of the city, not because it's what the assembly members and senators who represent New York City believe is in the best interests of the city, but because people who don't ever have to come back to New York City and explain their votes received hundreds of thousands of dollars from specific LLCs who are based here in New York City.
So should we go back to the Mailer-Breslin agenda of the seceding from the state?
Well, I have upstate colleagues who every once in a while put in a bill that they want to secede. And they say it's all New York City's fault and that we're taking all their money. We're of course spending far more money upstate than vice versa. But they say it's all our fault. And they would like to secede, and I always promise them I will co-sponsor the bill and get them the support of every member of New York City, because whatever
if
they
they go
think,
away, it's fine.
Whatever they think their logic is, we have our own reasons to agree with them. And then they're told, shut up, she's right. We don't want to secede. It's not going to work that way.
So, two things. Campaign finance rules would, if they were well written, could interfere with that flow of money.
If we just ended the LLC loophole, which
it would be a big thing.
It would be a huge thing. So my colleague Dan Squadron has been leading the charge to try to get that bill passed. It's not going to go near the floor of the Senate. We may explore other ways to try to get it done. The governor has said he wants to change it, but he's also the biggest recipient of LLC funds. So the dilemma of actually getting it done.
So
that's
what's going to happen with all the real estate things, 421A?
Rent regulation is up June 15th. Well, the irony to me, because each major indictment recently has referenced real estate as part of the corruption story.
Right, it's another part of the real estate companies doing the lobbying, because they also sometimes then give jobs to people.
Exactly.
Okay, we got that on record.
So I actually have been saying for months, this is great. One, we're cleaning out Albany. That's a good thing. I want more honest people in Albany. I'm so done with anybody who thinks this is their piggy bank or their personal game territory. So I said for months, okay, this is the year to really get public policy driving the housing decisions. What is the best answer for New York City's use of tax money as abatements and credits to motivate people to build real affordable housing? I'm open to all that. I don't think it's 421A. I'd rather the city redesigned a whole new program for itself. Right. But this is the year to do it, because the people who are so fixated on keeping their 421A to not build affordable housing, they sort of have to shut up and not show up in the rooms, because they're under investigation.
Has the city given you a proposal, proposal?
They have. I don't think it's nearly strong enough. In rent regulation, I think the city, the advocates, and the Democrats in the legislature are all on the same page. And I feel that we should be able to push our agenda this year finally, because perhaps real estate isn't as strong a voice in the room. At least they can't be in the room. So I actually thought it was a very good opportunity for a Democratic pro-housing governor, a new strong housing mayor, a new Democratic chair of the Assembly, not tied up in an investigation involving real estate as the previous speaker was, a new majority leader, with the old majority leader having to leave because of an investigation and indictment related to the same real estate characters. I thought, okay, we have to have sort of a clean slate for at least sitting down in the room and working as a functioning government. And then I read over the weekend, the lobbyists can't be in the room. Nothing's going to happen on real estate legislation, on rent regulation, on tax abatements for real estate. I'm like, why? The press doesn't think that the Assembly, the Senate, the governor, the housing agency, the mayor's office can actually figure this stuff out and make solid recommendations and move legislation unless the LLC lobbyists are in the room. That's ridiculous. But it did say to me, something is seriously wrong in Albany. There's even the perception by the media that we can't do anything unless our owners are in the room.
Isn't that something? So you've got rent regulations, vacancy decontrol, 421A. That's about it, right?
Well, there's some education issues. We have mayoral control for the city of New York.
Yeah.
I think Buffalo would like mayoral control. New York City, I think some people would like to see it amended.
What do you think?
I think there are some amendments we could make. I certainly don't think there's anyone who wants to see it gone at this time, nor can we even understand what it would look like if we just, it's June 15th, we ended mayoral control. So you hear that somehow gets tied into, at least by the governor, charter school policy. I don't really know why we would need to continue new charter school changes this year. There was a series of significant changes in charter school strengthening and protecting in last year's budget.
What about these commercials, this legislation of aid to private and parochial schools?
The educational tax credit. I'm a very strong opponent of that legislation.
What happened to the separation of church and state? Is it forgotten?
They make the argument that the way they designed it by going sideways, it doesn't violate the Constitution. I'm not a constitutional expert, so I'll leave that up to them. But I just stop with the question, why would we give billionaires such enormous tax breaks? So basically zeroing out their state taxes so they can direct their money to parochial and charter schools. You and I don't have to pay our taxes, and we have to hope government's making a wise decision in how it uses them. Why, if you're wealthy enough and you have accountants who can file this paperwork between January 1st and January 15th, do you get to basically zero out your state tax bill and direct your monies to private and parochial schools? Now, if you want to give philanthropically to private and parochial schools,
as long as they're not profit,
that's fine.
And you can get a tax
exactly. I only remember like 3 things from Hebrew school, but one was Maimonides' teachings about philanthropy. And nowhere in his sort of code of philanthropy and giving does it say thou shalt give for tax deductions for yourself. That's not even the definition of philanthropy, and I think either Christian or Jewish teaching. Yeah. So why are we allowing the wealthiest to zero out their tax bills so they can look like big men on campus when they give all this money to private schools?
We have 3 minutes, so let's cover a lot of things. The core curriculum?
Common Core.
Common Core.
I actually think if it had been rolled out right, it was good. And I still think we can fix it. I think the obsession about standardized tests is way beyond the pale of rationality.
And then putting the teachers' progress.
And evaluating teachers based on somebody coming in and watching them in a classroom for 3 hours and the test results. You know what you're saying? You're saying to smart people, okay, don't become a teacher. And if you become a teacher, make sure you never try to serve the hardest to serve kids, because you're going to get thrown out of the profession for being a failure just because you decided you wanted to teach low-income kids, special needs kids, new Americans. So we're sending the opposite message we should be sending, which is, please, if you're a smart, good person, come be a public school teacher. Work with our hardest to serve kids, because you can turn around their lives.
So what do you think? Are you going to pass these different rent regulations and bills? Are you going to extend them?
It's the real test. Certainly we will extend. The worst that would happen is straight extenders. I think that would be beyond a disappointment.
Yeah.
And if we do it, it should be for a very short time frame. maybe 2 years, because we have to fix these. And if people are saying we can't fix them this year because the lobbyists can't be in the room, then short extenders. But I believe that we should be able to do better. And by the way, if we don't figure out how to do better, in your next show we can discuss where we're all going when we have no place to live in New York City.
It's one of the it is just impossible, isn't it?
We're Look, the great news is the whole world seems to want to live here in New York City.
More and more people, right?
Everybody, these 90-story towers going up all over Manhattan. The amount of foreign money just in investments in apartments that they're not even living in. Meanwhile, the prices are so skyrocketing that people cannot afford to live in even the up-and-coming communities in the outer boroughs. They are gentrified out of the price
It's like
range.
a domino thing. They move from here to here to here to here.
And then we have the Airbnbs that are taking over all affordable units and turning them into illegal hotels. I mean, we have a crisis in this city. And Mayor de Blasio says he has a commitment to the 200,000 units. It's not enough. And unless we do our job in Albany, he can't get to that 200,000 mark. This is huge.
But you are optimistic.
Always. I'm a glass half full kind of person, but it can be a struggle.
And it would give us hope, somebody like me, if you were the governor.
Oh.
So thank you. Thank you very much, Liz Krueger.
I have my parents' vote and Ronnie Eldridge's vote.
Is there any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore? Please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.